As the table slowly began to tilt, I felt a strange sensation taking over me. What's happening? The X-ray technician noticed something was wrong and leaned over me, his eyes widening with concern. The last thing I saw was his panicked expression before everything went dark. The story you're about to hear is a true account. The names of characters and places have been changed to preserve the privacy of its authors. If you believe in miracles or have experienced one, leave your opinion in the comments and subscribe. I still remember that day as if it were yesterday. The smell of hospital disinfectant, the humming of machines, and that feeling of anxiety eating away at me inside. They had told me it was a routine procedure, a myelogram to see what was causing my back pain. But something inside told me this wasn't going to be like any other examination. Mrs. Barole, I need you to stay completely still during the procedure, the doctor told me in a voice that tried to be reassuring but only made me more nervous. If you move, you could have headaches for months. I lay down on the cold examination table, trying to control my breathing. The neurosurgeon and orthopedist were there, along with 2 X-ray technicians and a nurse. They all seemed so calm, so used to this. Why was I the only one who felt something was going to go terribly wrong? We're going to tilt the table slowly, explained one of the technicians. You'll feel a slight tingling when the contrast starts moving through your spine. The table began to move with a squeak that made my hair stand on end. At first, everything seemed normal. But then I felt something strange. It wasn't the tingling they had described. It was as if my body was slowly disconnecting. Doctor, I tried to call out, but my voice came out as a whisper. Something's not right. No one seemed to hear me. The doctors were absorbed in a conversation about golf. The nurse was checking something on her tablet, and the technicians were adjusting the machine's controls. Panic began to take over. My heart was beating so hard I could feel it in my ears. The room began to spin, and my vision blurred. Help! I managed to shout this time, but my voice sounded distant, as if coming from someone else. That's when one of the technicians finally realized something was wrong. He leaned over me, his eyes widening when he saw my condition. My God, he exclaimed. Something's wrong. At that moment, I felt as if an invisible force was pulling me. My eyes closed against my will, and the last thing I heard was the technician's alarm cry. Code blue. We need help here. And then everything went black. But that wasn't the end. No. It was just the beginning of something that would change my life forever. At that moment, suspended between life and death, I had no idea I was about to experience something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the beyond. I also didn't know that this experience would be the key to freeing myself from a life of abuse and fear. While my body lay motionless on that cold hospital table, my consciousness was about to embark on an incredible journey. A journey that would take me beyond the limits of this world and show me truths I had never imagined. But at that instant, all I could feel was fear and confusion. Was I dying? Was this the end? Suddenly, the darkness that enveloped me dissipated. I opened my eyes, or at least I thought I did, and found myself floating near the ceiling of the examination room. The scene unfolding below me was surreal and chaotic. What's happening? I thought, surprisingly calm. How can I be up here? I observed my lifeless body on the examination table, surrounded by medical staff in a frenzy of activity. The neurosurgeon was shouting orders, his face contorted with worry and stress. Start chest compressions, he ordered in a tense voice. We need the defibrillator here now. The 2 X-ray technicians took turns performing CPR on my body. Their faces were pale, drops of sweat running down their foreheads as they worked frantically to revive me. Come on, breathe, one of them muttered between compressions. Don't give up, please. The nurse was running back and forth, preparing equipment and medications. Her voice trembled as she spoke on the phone. We need a defibrillation unit in radiology. It's an emergency. As I watched this frantic scene, a strange sense of peace came over me. I no longer felt fear or pain. It was as if all the worries and suffering of my earthly life had vanished. I'm dead, I thought with surprising clarity. But instead of feeling panic, I experienced a profound sense of relief and liberation. That's when I noticed the presence beside me. I couldn't see it with my eyes, but I felt it with every fiber of my being. It was a presence full of love, compassion, and infinite wisdom. I felt wrapped in a warm and comforting embrace, as if I had been enveloped in a blanket of pure love and acceptance. "Who are you?" I asked without words. The answer came not in the form of words, but as an instant and profound understanding. This presence was someone I had always known, someone who had loved me unconditionally since the beginning of time. Was it God? A guardian angel? At that moment, labels seemed irrelevant. All that mattered was the pure and unconditional love emanating from this being. As I floated there, observing the scene below me and feeling this loving presence beside me, I began to experience a series of profound revelations. I saw my entire life unfold before me, not as a simple sequence of events, but as an intricate tapestry of lessons and growth. Every experience, every joy, and every pain took on new meaning. I saw how even the darkest moments of my life, the abuse I had suffered, the struggles I had faced, had served to shape my soul and strengthen me. Everything has a purpose, I understood with a clarity I had never experienced before. Every challenge, every tear, every laugh, it's all part of a greater plan. As I reflected on these revelations, I heard the neurosurgeon say in a grave voice, "Too much time has passed. If we revive her now, she could have brain damage." These words should have scared me, but in my current state, I only felt deep compassion for the doctor and for all those who were fighting so desperately to save my life. It was at that moment when I felt a pull, a kind of silent but powerful call. Part of me wanted to stay in this place of infinite peace and love, free from pain and suffering. But another part, a part that was still deeply connected to my earthly life, knew I had unfinished business. My children, I thought suddenly, and the image of their faces filled my mind. I can't leave them. They need me. The loving presence beside me seemed to understand my dilemma. Without words, it conveyed a question. Are you sure you want to go back? The life that awaits you will be full of challenges. I reflected for a moment, considering everything I had learned from this experience. I knew that going back would mean facing abuse, fear, and uncertainty. But I also knew I had a new strength within me, a deeper understanding of life and its purpose. Yes, I answered with conviction. I want to go back. I have to protect my children. I have to change my life. At that moment, I felt as if the presence embraced me one last time, filling me with love and strength for the journey that awaited me. And then, in an instant, everything changed. I felt a violent pull, as if I had been thrown back into my body. The pain and confusion returned suddenly, but with them came an iron determination. I knew my life would never be the same after this experience. I had died, yes, but I had also been reborn, with a new purpose and a new understanding of life and love. While floating in that space between worlds, wrapped in indescribable peace, I felt a sudden urgency that pierced through my being. It was as if a ray of reality had penetrated the bubble of serenity I was in. My children, I thought with overwhelming clarity. I can't abandon them. The image of their faces appeared before me. My 8-year-old son, with his eyes full of curiosity and fear, and my little one of barely 5 months, so defenseless and in need of protection. In that instant, all the love I felt for them intensified, mixing with a deep fear for their well-being. I addressed the presence accompanying me, that entity full of love and wisdom that seemed to understand everything. I need to go back, I said with a determination that surprised even myself. My children need me. I can't leave them alone with him. At that moment, as if responding to my thoughts, the presence showed me a series of images. They were quick but intensely vivid flashes of my married life. I saw scenes I had tried to forget. My husband shouting, his eyes full of uncontrollable anger. I saw myself crouched in a corner, trying to protect my son from his fury. I heard my babies crying mixed with the sound of objects breaking against the walls. Why are you showing me this? I asked, feeling a mixture of pain and shame. The answer came not in words, but in the form of more images. This time, I saw all my attempts to change the situation. The long letter I had written, begging for change. The couple therapy sessions I had dragged my husband to. The conversations with our church pastor. I saw my own tears. My promises that this time would be different. My hopes repeatedly crushed. It was then that I understood the truth I had been avoiding for so long. It's not him who needs to change, I realized with painful clarity. It's me. I'm the one who needs to be strong enough to leave. The presence beside me seemed to approve of this revelation. I felt a wave of support and encouragement emanating from it, as if saying, now you understand. But with this understanding came fear. How could I do it? How could I face him, protect my children, and build a new life? The task seemed overwhelming. As if reading my doubts, the presence enveloped me in a sensation of incredible love and strength. It was at that moment when I made my promise. If you let me go back, I said with a conviction that came from the deepest part of my being, I swear I'll make myself strong enough to leave him. I'll protect my children. I'll change our lives. The moment I spoke those words, I felt a change. The peace and serenity surrounding me began to fade. I felt as if I were being pulled back to my body, back to the reality of the hospital and pain. But something had changed inside me. I was no longer the same woman who had lain down on that examination table. I had died, yes, but I had also been reborn. Reborn with a purpose, with a strength I didn't know I possessed. As I felt myself returning to my body, I carried with me the memory of that loving presence, the memory of the peace I had experienced, and above all, the promise I had made. A promise not only to that divine presence, but to myself and my children. I knew the path ahead would be difficult. I would have to face my fears, overcome years of abuse and manipulation, and find the strength to build a new life. But I also knew I was no longer alone. I had experienced a love and acceptance beyond this world, and that experience had changed me forever. As I opened my eyes, returning to the reality of the hospital, I felt a mix of emotions. Fear of the challenges that awaited me, but also an unshakable determination. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, a fighter, a mother willing to do whatever necessary to protect her children. I'm going to keep my promise, I thought as the doctors rushed around me, amazed by my sudden return to life. I'm going to be strong. I'm going to change our lives. And with that thought, I took my first conscious breath in my new life, ready to face any challenge that stood in my way toward freedom and safety for me and my children. The impact was sudden and brutal. I felt as if I had been thrown from a great height directly into my body. The pain that had been absent during my out-of-body experience returned with overwhelming intensity. My eyes snapped open, and the bright light of the operating room temporarily blinded me. "She's awake," exclaimed a voice full of amazement and relief. I blinked several times, trying to focus my vision. The blurry faces around me began to take shape. I saw the neurosurgeon, with an expression of disbelief on his sweaty face. Beside him, the orthopedist looked at me with wide eyes, as if seeing a ghost. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and rough. I could only emit a weak whisper. What happened?" The nurse quickly approached my side, placing a gentle but firm hand on my shoulder. "Don't speak now, Mrs. Barol. We need to stabilize you first." The next 20 minutes were a whirlwind of activity. Doctors and nurses moved around me, checking my vital signs, adjusting equipment, and speaking quietly among themselves. I heard fragments of their conversation. No pulse for, neurological response, medical miracle. Finally, when they seemed satisfied with my condition, the nurse removed the oxygen mask from my face. I took a deep breath, feeling my lungs expand. It was as if I were breathing for the first time. "What happened?" I asked again, this time with more strength in my voice. I was on the ceiling. I could see all of you. I could hear you." The silence that followed my words was deafening. The neurosurgeon and orthopedist exchanged glances, a mixture of confusion and concern on their faces. "Mrs. Barol," the neurosurgeon began cautiously, "you experienced a complication during the procedure. Your heart stopped, and we had to resuscitate you." "I know," I replied with a calmness that seemed to surprise them. "I saw you do it. I saw when you called the code blue. I saw when they brought the defibrillator." The neurosurgeon visibly paled. That's impossible. You were unconscious." But I wasn't going to be dissuaded. The experience I had lived was too real, too profound to be denied. "No, doctor. I was conscious, but not in my body. I was up above, watching everything. I saw when the nurse called on the phone requesting the defibrillation unit. I saw the technicians taking turns doing chest compressions. With each detail I mentioned, the faces of those present showed more amazement and confusion. The orthopedist stepped forward, his expression a mixture of fascination and skepticism. "Can you tell us more?" he asked, ignoring the warning look the neurosurgeon gave him. "What else did you see?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. I saw when the man brought the box with the heart monitor. I saw the flat line on the screen. And I stopped, hesitating for a moment. How could I explain the presence I had felt, the unconditional love that had enveloped me? How could I describe the peace and clarity I had experienced? And I wasn't alone, I concluded softly. There was a presence with me, full of love and understanding. The neurosurgeon shook his head abruptly. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "I'm not going to stay here listening to this." With those words, he turned around and quickly left the room, the door closing firmly behind him. Her departure left a tense silence in the room. But to my surprise, the orthopedist approached my bed and took my hand in his. His eyes shone with a mixture of curiosity and compassion. "Mrs. Barole," he said softly, "please tell me more. How did you feel? What exactly did you experience?" And so, with the remaining medical staff listening attentively, I began to relate my experience. I told them about the sensation of floating, about the indescribable peace I had felt. I told them about my life review, about the revelations I had. And although I knew it might sound incredible, I told them about the loving presence that had accompanied me. While I spoke, I noticed that the expressions around me changed. Initial skepticism gave way to fascination, and in some cases, to a kind of reverent. The nurse even wiped away a tear when I described the unconditional love I had experienced. When I finished my story, the orthopedist gently squeezed my hand. "Thank you for sharing this with us," he said with emotion in his voice. "I can't explain what happened to you, but I can tell you it's a miracle that you're here with us now." At that moment, I felt a wave of gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance I had been given, for the strength I had found, and for these people who, despite their scientific training, were willing to listen and consider an experience that defied their understanding of the world. "Doctor," I said, looking the orthopedist in the eyes, "do you believe in miracles?" He returned my gaze, a small smile forming on his lips. "Mrs. Barole, after what I've just heard and seen today, I think I'll have to reconsider many things." As I lay there, surrounded by machines and medical staff, I felt a deep sense of peace and purpose. I knew my life had changed forever. And although the challenges that awaited me were enormous, I also knew that I carried with me a new strength and understanding. The miracle wasn't just that I had survived. The real miracle was the transformation I had experienced and the opportunity one now had to change my life and that of my children. The days following my near-death experience were a confusing mix of physical recovery and emotional turmoil. While my body struggled to heal from the surgery and the trauma of having been technically dead, my mind kept racing, full of memories of what I had experienced beyond this world. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see with crystal clarity the scene in the examination room, my motionless body on the table while the medical staff fought to revive me. I could feel again that indescribable peace, that unconditional love that had enveloped me. And above all, I remembered the promise I had made, to be strong, to change my life, to protect my children. However, I soon realized that sharing this experience wasn't going to be easy. The first indication came when, the day after surgery, I asked a nurse about what had happened during the myelogram. "Excuse me," I said when she came in to check my vital signs. "Could you tell me exactly what happened during my procedure yesterday?" The nurse frowned, consulting my chart. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Barole, but I don't see anything unusual recorded here. The procedure appears to have been routine." I insisted, describing what I remembered. The code blue, the resuscitation, my out-of-body experience. But the nurse just shook her head, with an expression of confusion and slight concern on her face. "Perhaps it was a dream," she suggested kindly. "Medications can cause hallucinations sometimes." Frustrated, I waited for the neurosurgeon's visit, sure that he would confirm my experience. But when he finally arrived, his attitude left me cold. "Mrs. Barole," he said in a sharp tone, "I'm here to discuss your surgery and your recovery." I have no intention of talking about supposed paranormal experiences or stress-induced hallucinations. I tried to protest, to explain that what I had experienced was real, but he interrupted me abruptly. I suggest you focus on your physical recovery and set aside these fantasies. They're not healthy and don't help your healing process. With those words, he left the room, leaving me with a feeling of helplessness and frustration. Why wouldn't anyone acknowledge what had happened? Were they all determined to deny the reality of my experience? The following days followed a similar pattern. Every time I tried to talk about my near-death experience, I was met with skepticism, denial, or simple discomfort. Even the orthopedist, who had initially shown interest, now seemed to avoid the topic, focusing exclusively on my physical recovery. Finally, the day of my hospital discharge arrived. My husband came to pick me up, and on the way home, I decided to share with him what I had experienced. Surely he, who knew me better than anyone, would understand the depth and importance of my experience. "Honey," I began cautiously, "something extraordinary happened to me during the procedure. I died for a moment, and I experienced something incredible." I told him everything. The sensation of floating outside my body, the loving presence that accompanied me, the revelations I had about our life together, and the promise I made to change things. When I finished, there was a long silence. Finally, my husband spoke, his voice a mixture of condescension and annoyance. "Barbara, please. That couldn't have happened. You probably hallucinated from the medications or stress. Stop making up stories." His words hit me like a slap. "I'm not making anything up," I protested. "What I experienced was real. More real than anything I've ever experienced before." But he just shook his head, his irritation visibly growing. "Enough already. I don't want to hear any more about this. Focus on recovering and leave these nonsense ideas alone." At that moment, I felt a part of me close off. The joy and peace I had brought back from my experience were overshadowed by the weight of others' denial and disbelief. It was then that I made the decision to keep my experience to myself. If no one was going to believe me, if everyone was going to dismiss what I had lived through as a hallucination or fantasy, then I would keep it secret. But I wouldn't forget it. I couldn't forget it. For the next 12 years, I carried my near-death experience like a secret treasure, hidden in the depths of my heart. In the darkest moments, when my husband's abuse intensified, when fear threatened to consume me, I clung to the memory of that peace, that unconditional love I had experienced. I repeated to myself the promise I had made, to be strong, to change my life, to protect my children. And although the path was long and difficult, that promise became my beacon, guiding me through the darkness toward a better future. There were times when I was tempted to share my experience, to seek someone who might understand. But the memory of the reactions I had received at the hospital and from my own husband stopped me. Who would believe me? Who could understand the depth of what I had experienced? So I kept silent, allowing my experience to transform me from within. I used the strength I had found to survive, to plan my escape, to protect my children as best I could. And although the outside world couldn't see the change, I knew I was no longer the same person who had entered that examination room so many years ago. My near-death experience became my most precious secret, a source of strength and hope in the darkest moments. And although years would pass before I could share it openly, its impact on my life was immediate and profound. It had changed me forever, and eventually it would change the course of my life and that of my children. 12 years. 12 long years keeping silent about the most profound and transformative experience of my life. But everything was about to change. It was a day like any other. My daughter, now 12 years old, had a gymnastics class and I was accompanying her as usual. While watching her practice, a woman sat down beside me. I recognized her as Sarah, a nurse from the local hospital with whom I had developed a casual friendship. "How are you, Barbara?" she asked with a kind smile. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, and somehow our conversation drifted toward our experiences in the medical field. It was then that I felt an inexplicable impulse, an urgent need to share my secret kept for so long. "Sarah," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "have you ever heard of people having unusual experiences during medical procedures?" She looked at me curiously. "You mean things like near-death experiences?" Those words, Near-death experience. For the first time, I heard a term that described what had happened to me. I felt as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Yes, I replied, almost in a whisper. Exactly that. And so, sitting in the bleachers of a school gymnasium, I began to unearth my secret. I told Sarah everything. The out-of-body experience, the loving presence, the revelations I had. To my surprise and relief, she listened without judgment, her eyes full of understanding and wonder. Barbara, she said when I finished, what you experienced is called a near-death experience, or NDE. You're not alone, you know? There are many people who have gone through something similar. Her words were like balm for my soul. I wasn't crazy. I hadn't imagined anything. What I had experienced was real, and it had a name. There's a lot of information about this on the internet, Sarah continued. You should do some research. I think you'll be surprised by what you can find. That night, after putting my children to bed, I turned on the computer with trembling hands. I typed near-death experience into the search engine, and my world expanded. For the next 3 days, I barely slept. I read article after article, testimony after testimony. I discovered that there were thousands of people around the world who had experienced something similar to what I had lived through. Scientists, doctors, and psychologists were studying these experiences, trying to understand their meaning and their impact on people's lives. Every story I read resonated deeply within me. The sensation of peace, the unconditional love, the life review. All these elements that had been part of my experience were repeated over and over in others' accounts. For the first time in 12 years, I felt truly understood and validated. But beyond validation, this revelation brought with it a profound transformation. I understood that my experience wasn't just something that had happened to me, but a gift that I could share with others. A gift that could help others find hope, strength, and purpose in their lives. With this new understanding, I felt renewed energy flowing through me. The promise I had made during my near-death experience, to be strong and change my life, took on new meaning. It was no longer just about surviving, but about living fully, sharing my story, and helping others. Armed with this new knowledge and purpose, I made decisions that I had been postponing for years. I finally found the courage to leave my abusive marriage, to seek help and build a new life for myself and my children. It wasn't easy. There were moments of fear and uncertainty. But every time I doubted, I remembered the peace and love I had experienced during my NDE. I remembered the strength I had found in that moment, and that gave me the courage to keep going. Little by little, I began to share my story with more people. At first, only with close friends and family. Then, in support groups for survivors of domestic abuse. To my surprise, my story resonated with many people, even those who hadn't had an NDE. They found hope in my experience, a reason to believe that change was possible, that there was something beyond the pain and suffering they were experiencing. Over time, my voice grew stronger. I began giving talks in the community, sharing not only my near-death experience, but also how it had transformed my life. I spoke about the strength we all carry within us, about our capacity for change and growth, even in the most difficult circumstances. My near-death experience, which was once a closely guarded secret, became my most powerful testimony. It was no longer something I feared sharing, but a beacon of hope that I could offer to others. Today, I look back and see how each step of my journey, even the most painful ones, led me to this point. The near-death experience was just the beginning. The real transformation occurred in the years that followed, in the decisions I made, in the lives I was able to touch by sharing my story. And as I continue on this path, I feel deep gratitude. Gratitude for the second chance I was given, for the strength I found, and for the ability to use my experience to help others. My life has become a living testimony that change is possible, that there is hope even in the darkest moments. Each day is a new opportunity to live the promise I made during my near-death experience. A promise not just for me and my children, but for all those whose lives I can touch with my story. And in each person who finds hope or strength in my account, I see the true miracle of my near-death experience reflected.